Alright, hello everyone. I'm here with another guest. This time the super famous Sam Blake. Just for a little bit of an introduction, Sam Blake has 19 GP top 8s with 1 win and 3 Pro Tour top 8s, but I think he's mostly known for like playing these like obscure weird decks, not only in Constructed but also in Limited. For example, I remember watching a GP a couple of years back and he was playing this great Aurora deck. And no one was playing that deck, and I think that's like very interesting. A lot of people probably like you because of that. And yeah, how it's going, Sam?
I'm good.
Great. I don't really know where to start. Maybe we can start with the fact that you just play these like different types of strategies. Do you think that's the case just because you like maybe enjoy them more, or that's like the way you like to approach Magic? Or you're playing those decks because you think they actually give you the highest EV in the tournament?
Well, it's both. So like you mentioned that I play on unusual limited decks, which is certainly true. I could point to a lot of really unusual things I've done in various competitive limited environments. Notably, I've played 55 cards in a draft in day 2 of a Grand Prix.
I actually wanted to ask about that, but you said it yourself. I think it was like a blue-green self-mill deck, and you just had like too much mill, and if you just played 40 cards, it wouldn't really work.
Yeah, I had a lot of cards that scaled for the number of cards in my graveyard, and I had a lot of cards that were good at milling large numbers of cards. And the power level was pretty flat. Like, all of my cards basically did like the same thing or contributed to the same strategy, and a lot of the cards that were best were cards that like worked if I milled them. So I didn't feel like I was giving up very much by playing more cards, and the size of my library was a real resource because the larger my library was, the larger I could make my graveyard eventually before killing myself. And so I didn't play 55 cards because I thought it was silly or I wanted to handicap myself. I played 55 cards because I thought that it was the way to win, and I was the player who ended up doing that because I'm willing to like look for outside of the box solutions or whatever, and I'm willing to like take risks in high stakes environments. I think that like a lot of players talk about like a pick they would make at like their kitchen table that they wouldn't make at a Grand Prix, where it's like, yeah, like, I might try to draft this wacky fun deck like if I'm just playing at home, but I'm going to take the safe pick if I'm like playing for a lot. And that's not really my mentality because I play so much both at my kitchen table and in high stakes matches that I just don't care that much about like taking a risk. Basically whenever I take a risk, it's calculated, right? Like I only do it because I think that it's the play that's going to give me the higher chance of winning. But I don't mind if it's a polarizing risk, right? Like if there's a large chance that it'll go poorly, but also a large chance that it'll go well. I don't need like just a thing that's going to be like.
You would never really do a thing that like gives you like maybe slightly like lower EV, at least in your mind. You just always like trying to maximize your chances, and even though it might bring a risk, you still do it because you think it gives you the highest possible win percentage. Or
yeah, I mean, I think that what separates me from other players is both that I maybe have an unusually high risk tolerance, and also that I'm just more willing, like I consider a wider range of possibilities than I think a lot of other people do. And like, I also just like, if I find something that has potential, but the potential isn't obvious, I want to explore that potential. Like my approach to Magic is very much driven by curiosity, and I just enjoy learning enough that I'm willing to like go out of my way to put myself in spots to learn something. And I guess I just very much believe that you should practice the way you play and play the way you practice, because that's just what you're going to be most comfortable and familiar with. And because my practice is driven by this like exploratory drive, I guess like maybe an unhealthy level of that seeps into like my actual competitive play, just because it's like what I'm used to doing. And I've definitely had Grand Prix, like the first Grand Prix that I played with Modern Horizons, I had this idea about like a weird deck that could exist in this format that like used stream of thought and splice cards to like generate some kind of inevitability, and then maybe used something like spore frog loops to stay alive.
Yeah,
and
I
it
think
turned
there
out
is.
that, like,
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think there's even like a YouTube video about like that specific deck. Like
yeah,
someone.
but I wrote an article going into great length about it and stuff. But the first time that the actual first time I tried to draft anything like that was in a Grand Prix, and I had definitely not worked out all the kinks. I was wrong about some of what it was looking for. I hadn't figured out everything that mattered. I knew there was something there, and like the thing that I was interested in was learning how to draft that deck, and it happened to be at a Grand Prix. But I saw that I had the opportunity because like I saw a couple of cards that contributed to that strategy early, and I was like, well, let's see if I can figure it out on the fly. And I didn't like that deck was able to do some cool things, and I like won a match with it, but also it just wasn't drafted correctly for how I learned to draft the deck later. But I'm always willing to just try to learn, even if I'm already at the exhibition stage and I should be doing stuff that I know. That's just I don't care that much. I'm willing to I value learning more than I value winning in most cases.
So you said that you're basically playing Magic to like learn, explore stuff, just to like learn and have fun. Do you think that your results might have suffered a lot because of that? Because as you said, during the testing, a lot of the time you're just like exploring new strategies and stuff. And maybe because of that, even if you at the end decide to not play one of those decks, you maybe didn't spend as much time on just like playing, I don't know, like stock mono red or whatever that ended up being your choice. Do you think that maybe if you just focus solely on winning, you might have gotten like 2 more to pace or something like?
Well, there's a lot to this question, right? Like, so I've played in like 30 Pro Tours or whatever, and the question is, if my approach to preparing for a Pro Tour had always been that I'll just like practice with the best deck and then enter the tournament playing the best deck, like, do I think that I'm talented enough that I would maybe like have won as much with like the best decks as players who have been more successful than I am? Or am I just like inherently like less skilled at Magic than someone like Paulo, such that I need to like find some weird way to get an edge by playing something that my opponents don't expect, and that like really my results are a result of the times when I've found an exceptional deck or something like that to give myself an edge. And I think that that's actually kind of a false binary that doesn't really get to the heart of like human motivations and what drives me as a person and a player. And I think that like I just I couldn't force myself to just like grind hundreds of hours of the best deck to learn how to play it perfectly and try to get an edge that way. That's not what's fun about Magic for me. And you just get the square peg round hole thing where like I just end up not practicing instead of like I play Magic because it's what I enjoy doing, and I need to be doing it in a way that I enjoy and that's stimulating for me. And that applies both to, well, I'm just going to put way more hours into exploring interesting problems for myself than I'm going to put into learning how to play the best deck. And also, when I'm actually in a tournament, I'm going to be much happier and much more motivated if I'm like driven by a desire to prove something that I think other people don't believe or don't understand, or discover something that like basically just like when I'm playing my own thing, I just like care so much more about it and get so much more excited about my wins, and like I'm like it's just I'm in a very different mindset when I'm doing that. Now, I do just fundamentally know how to play Magic, and like I do have a Pro Tour top 8 with like a mono red aggro deck that I hated and had no interest in playing and like basically didn't test with. And so, like, I can't say that I wouldn't have similar or better results if I had always done that, but I would have enjoyed my time much less.
I actually never tested with you, so like I have no idea, and I just like wanted to ask about that a little bit. Like, how big of an influence does the fact that you like do all of these things have on the team? Like, do people just like let you do your thing, and then maybe if you break it, they jump on it, or are there like people just like helping you with your ideas? How does it all play out?
Yeah, so it's important to me to have a team because, like, having a team to be able to fall back on their results means that I can try things that just might not work and then not be totally sunk if it doesn't work. Given that that's my thought process, I obviously value having a team that's working on other stuff. I'm not trying to get the whole team to work on whatever nonsense I'm on. For the most part, I try to do as much as I can either by myself or with one other person. Like, normally people will like share a list and try to get people to collaborate on it and stuff like that. Whereas for me, I'm like, well, there's no real value in posting like my first draft of a deck because people will just like look at it and think it's terrible and they're not going to like try to iterate on it or anything like that. So I'm going to come up with my first draft, play some games, lose horribly with it, figure out what's wrong with it, figure out if there's anything there that, like, when I'm playing games with it, strikes me as having potential, and then try to, like, build around the stuff that I like, and then just, like, not try to get... Basically, I want to do all the early tuning by myself and just not even try to involve anyone else in the process until I'm at the point where it's like, okay, now if I play with this, I can actually, like, beat you and show you what I'm trying to do here, and now we can try to tune this together. But while it's, like, before it's in that, like, somewhat competitive stage, this is just my own project. And obviously it helps me to have like a playtest partner to get those games in with, but I don't want to like draw anyone's attention outside of just like, hey, play some games against me.
I see. You've been kinda around forever. I remember being a kid, and you know, you were a pro at that point already. I mean, you look really young, but I think you are on a pro tour for like maybe like 15 years now or something. You know, most of the people know you now. You have like one of the hugest following in among the Magic players and stuff like that. But I don't actually have like no idea how did it like all started. Like, did you have problems qualifying for the pro tour? How old were you? You know, all these things. Like, was it through PTQs and stuff? Like, you just like tell us your story.
So, I am old and have been playing forever. So
I didn't mean to insult you if it came out like that.
No, I mean, so like my first pro tour was in 2006, and my first game of Magic was in 1994. Wow. So yeah, so I was actually playing Magic for 12 years before I played on the pro tour, which is a long time. And I said I'm old, but I'm not that old. In 1994, I was 12. I think I was 11 when I like first learned the game. You know, it was 94, so the game had come out 1 year ago, which is just it. But like the first year that Magic was out, like very few people knew about it. And like most people who started, like when the game really caught on was around when I started playing. So the game was basically brand new as far as like, you know, I played it, like obviously I played it as soon as I learned about it. Yeah, so when I played like the most expensive card, I actually like, I purchased a Black Lotus for $160.
Oh. Was it in 1994 or was it a little bit later?
It was... I don't know if it was like late 94 or 95, maybe even early 96.
I actually have like no idea for like how long were the Power 9 cards like this cheap, but I assume it probably wasn't for too long, right?
Well, so like, you know, when I was started, so not to get too deep into like, you know, Magic's history and development and stuff, but like when I started, like the internet was barely a thing. And so like to find out about cards and stuff, like you had to buy a magazine, like a paper magazine, to like tell you what cards were worth and even to figure out like what cards existed and stuff. You couldn't just Google it because Google didn't really exist. Google just didn't exist.
How often did the magazine came out? Because I assume that, you know...
I think like monthly.
Oh, okay, I see.
But like the first, there was a magazine called Scry. There were basically like two major price guide magazines that were Scry and Inquest, and then there was The Duelist, which was like a content magazine. But like, so the first copy of Scry that I bought was Scry #2, and it had an advertisement for a Lotus for $18. I don't think that by the time it was published, that store was still selling Lotuses for $18. I think that, like, they didn't know how much the game would explode, and like the value of Lotus went up very quickly. But like when that magazine was being printed, there was a store that wanted to advertise that they were selling Black Lotus for $18.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so cards weren't very expensive compared to what they are now, but they were still pretty expensive for like a 12-year-old. And so I, like, my whole childhood, teenage years or whatever, basically I would just save up any money I could and buy Magic cards. I never spent a dime on anything else. As a result, I've built up habits about, like, you know, never buying anything in convention centers, because I was always, like, going to tournaments and I would never buy food during the day because that's money that I could spend on Magic cards, and I didn't have all the cards I needed.
That explains a lot.
And just old habits die hard, you know. Yeah, anyway, early on, like, I played in, like, the Wild West days, but I was a kid and didn't have a collection, and but I, like, played in local tournaments. Like, the first tournament that I played in, I was playing just, like, an 80-card pile that couldn't even be called Sealed Deck. It was just, like, the red, green, and black cards that I owned. And, like, I beat my first opponent by just, like, casting a Hypnotic Spectre and attacking a few times or whatever. And then my second opponent was playing a fully powered deck with 4 copies of Balance, and just, like, a coherent strategy, and, like, I'd never seen a Mox before. And then we just sit down and play. And I don't know if you understand exactly how bad random cards from Revised and Legends are against a fully powered deck.
I do somewhat. They're really bad.
Yeah, I didn't win. But I learned a lot about, like, what Magic is when I lost that match. And that's, like, so that's kind of the whole thing, though. Like, in the mid and early 90s, you couldn't just, like, there wasn't net decking. You couldn't look up any real information about Magic online. So the only way I learned was by just, like, going and meeting players and playing in tournaments. So I, like, went to all the local tournaments I could, and I lost a lot, and I learned a lot about, like, stuff that's possible. But I didn't, like, I played Magic throughout the entire lifespan of, like, the Junior Super Series, and I, like, vaguely heard references to it, but I never figured out what it was or how to find it or how to play in it. Like, I would have loved to have competed in it. I just didn't know how to do that. I didn't, yeah. It wasn't at my local store, and so I didn't have access to it. So anyway, long story short, I eventually started playing PTQs, but very slowly, because, like, PTQs started in, like, not what is now considered vintage, and when, like, standards started to be a thing, I owned cards for vintage, but I didn't have the money to keep up with the rotating format.
I see.
So I was like, well, I have a vintage deck, but I don't have a standard deck, so I just can't play PTQs, because my collection is all tied up in this other thing. And so for a while, I was, like, a vintage-only player.
Did you never consider to just, like, sell the cards to be able to play in the tournaments?
I was smart enough not to sell Moxes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So, and I mean, like, I just didn't have, like, a path. Like, my parents are, like, accepting and supportive, but not super engaged. So they would, like, let me play, and they'd take me to, like, the local store, but they wouldn't, like, try to figure out how I could, like, go to the next level, or, like, you know, there wasn't, like, okay, well, like, Sam's pretty serious about this, like, how can it be, like, a real thing? So there was just never, like, a clear path as a kid to how can I get really competitive about this. So then in high school, I eventually, like, started playing PTQs, and So like my first PTQ top 8, I think, according to my Planeswalker Point history, when that was a thing, was my second PTQ. The second PTQ that I played in, I top 8'd, and it was in Masks Block Constructed.
How many people were playing those PTQs back in the day?
I think it was like 80.
Okay. That's decent.
Yeah, I think it was around 80. Yeah, PTQs around me back then, like, used to do stuff like give a sandwich to everyone who top 8'd. It's just like, I don't know, random, like...
I mean, I think I haven't played in a PTQ like that, so...
Yeah, it just had a slightly different feel. And, like, they were in, like, mostly hotel ballrooms, which still happens sometimes, but now, like, obviously Grand Prix are in convention centers where it's, you know, the difference between a carpeted floor and a concrete floor, basically. But yeah, so I played in PTQs in high school, but I never won one, but I, like, top 8'd a lot. I top 8'd a lot of PTQs in high school. And then when I went to college, there was, like, this brief delusional period where I thought that I would, like, stop playing Magic and, like, I don't know, become a college student or something. And so, like, when I first went to college, I, like, didn't even bring my cards or anything. And then, like, after I was at college for, like, a couple months, I, like, met people who played, and I was like, okay, I'll get my cards. And then it was like, oh, these people are, like, casual Magic players, obviously. Yeah. And so now I had cards, but I didn't really have opponents. Like, there were people who had played some casual Magic, but I had top 8'd several PTQs at this point. We were just in a very different place. And eventually I, like, the next year, basically, I went to a really small school. I went to a college with 1,200 students. So it's not like somewhere on campus there's a competitive Magic player somewhere. It was just like, well, these are the 6 people who play Magic, and they're all really casual. But then it just happened that my sophomore year, I met 2 people who, like, knew each other in high school, who played Magic together, who, like, played not, like, really competitively, but at least, like, enough to, like, follow what happens in competitive tournaments and have real decks.
I'm sorry to interrupt. How old were you during that time? Because, for example, in Czech, we go to college at different age than in States.
I was 18.
Okay.
Yeah, and so, well, I mean, I was 19 when the next class came in, and I met some other people who played. And so then, like, we started to have, like, enough people who, like, basically, in college, I played a lot of, like, casual competitive, like, not Commander, because that didn't exist, but, like, the version of that did exist back then. Like, we played a lot of, like, big deck multiplayer formats. So I was playing a lot and, like, messing around with casual stuff. But Magic Online came out while I was in college. And so when that came out, then I started playing a lot of Magic Online, and then I would still play, like, casual Magic with my friends, but we would also just, like, a bunch of us were drafting online a lot, and, like, we'd have, like, adjacent dorm rooms and, you know, run back and forth to, like, whoever was in a draft at that moment to, like, all, like, watch them draft and stuff. And there were, I don't know, like, maybe 4-ish of us who were just, like, drafting a lot on Magic Online. And then I played every now and then. I would find a way to, like, get to a PTQ to play in college, but, like, mostly I just, like, stayed on campus in a really small town and was, like, totally unaware of, like, PTQs and stuff. I just played online. I played some PTQs but didn't win any. And then when I graduated college, I moved to Madison, opened a game store, and spent all my time playing Magic with competitive players, and was driving, like, to any PTQ within, like, 10 hours. We would take a lot of very long road trips and just play, like, some competitive event, like, every weekend.
I'm just curious about one thing. You said that your main drive in Magic is just, like, the curiosity and learning, but, you know, when you go to all these PTQs and stuff, I like, the goal is mainly to just, like try to win and stuff. How does that, like, correlate, or, like, can you maybe say something about that? You still try to win, or, like...
learning is all about the scientific method. It's all about coming up with a hypothesis and testing the hypothesis. The hypotheses that I come up with are all about competitive Magic. It's all, this is the best way to do this thing, or this like deck is actually good, or whatever. And the only way to test that hypothesis is in a competitive setting against people who are like good enough that it actually means something if you win. So like, I mean, it's the same thing everyone says about like if you want to get better, play against better players. The learning that I'm trying to do is all either testing hypotheses about competitive environments or learning by playing against better players. So and like growing up, like the situations that I described in high school and college, I just never had access to people who took the game as seriously as I did. I was always the most competitive of my friends. I was always basically like, I had some friends who played like casually and I could play a lot of games, but none of them were like going to PTQs and trying to win. And so like tournaments, like I had to go to tournaments to find other people who were serious. And so it's basically my whole life has been a struggle to find people who like took Magic as seriously as I did.
I mean, did that change once you qualified for the PT, or?
Yeah, I mean, so yes, but it was a rocky transition. So I won my first PTQ with the original Dredge deck that used like Icarid and Psychotog and Zombie Infestation. I won the same week that Mike Crum won a Grand Prix with that deck in a different place.
Was it like a known deck at that point, or you know?
It was like, so I mean, it was known in that like I got it from the internet. Like basically, it had like spoiled the week before, and I was just like, that deck looks great. I'll pick it up and play it.
So like some people knew about it, but it wasn't like, you know, everyone was playing Psycho.
It basically like I played it the week after it debuted, where it's like this is a thing you can do, and then no one had time to like adapt to it. It was just you can either like pick this up or ignore it, but like no one's played games against it. Because it's not like stuff moved as quickly as it does now with Arena and everything. Like Magic Online existed, but it drove paper metagames very slowly relative to what we're used to now. Yeah, so I qualified for my first Pro Tour, Honolulu 2006, the first Pro Tour in Hawaii, the one that Mark Herbolz won. And I still like knew very, very few people there. Like I tested with like people who I knew in Madison. It's not like I found some other pros to work with. And so like my introduction to the pro scene was a lot of like kind of trying to prove myself as someone who like knew what I was saying even though I was new there. It like making connections with like other pros was rocky early on.
You might actually not remember this, but I actually had kind of the same experience, including you. One of my in one of my first Pro Tours, Justin Cohen was in top 4, and I was actually sitting like next to each other when we were watching, and you were like talking about what he maybe should have done, and I was also like trying to prove myself by like saying stuff that made sense. You probably don't remember, but you know when you said that, like the memory kind of.
Yeah, no, like I was, you know, the kid who like I would just like watch people like team draft, and then they'd go to build their decks, and I would be like, I think you should play this thing instead of this thing, and they're like, who are you and why are you telling me what to do?
I mean, I think pretty much everyone was there, right, at some point. Like everyone has to start somewhere, so.
Yeah. I think, you know, different people have different intuitions about like how aggressive they should be about trying to find an in or whatever, and I think a lot of people have the advantage of like knowing people from their local community who like know other people and like can get introduced and don't need to like, you know, make an ass of themselves to like get anyone to listen to them. But it just depends.
So like at the beginning you just didn't really know anyone. How did that progress? Because I assume that if you didn't know anyone, it was like probably pretty hard for you to like find people to test with and stuff like that. So like were the beginnings hard to like stay on the train and stuff?
Yeah, I mean, so there were like obviously some people, like I knew some people locally. Like Madison does have a really good like competitive scene, and there were a bunch of good players who like I knew locally, and there were people who I knew from PTQs who like obviously they were PTQ players, so they weren't like at all the PTs and stuff. But like I did at this point have people who I talked to about Magic who like understood Magic and stuff. But you know, I did need to have like actual success before I was involved in like pro teams. Like, so like I won the car at a side event at a Worlds that I wasn't qualified for with a deck that I built myself that was not a team effort at all. That's the Goblins deck that played like Bogart Shenanigans and Mudbutt and Torch Runner and a bunch of cards no one else would ever put anywhere near a constructed deck. I think that, yeah, I mean, I still didn't have like a team before, like the next year I took second at Nationals, and like I didn't have, like for that event I just prepared with people in Madison. It's not like I was part of a pro team for that. Mm-hmm. So I needed real successes to like make connections with other pros is basically the answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how is it with you and Magic right now? We don't really have any like real tournaments. Everything is on Arena. You know, are you even like maybe playing in the qualifiers on Arena and stuff, or like, you know, are you like playing at all right now? What's your position in Magic right now?
I think I understand where this question's going. Like, what's my current involvement with Magic? I am very much a paper boomer.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I grew up on paper. I love paper. I play Magic to connect with people. I really don't like online tournaments, but I do like drafting, and I don't have a lot of other ways to play. Like, you know, obviously 100% of the Magic that I've played in the last 10 months has been online. So I still play, but I'm not really interested. Like, the changes to organized play that have happened since the MPL was created made me less interested in competitive Magic in a lot of different ways for a lot of different reasons that I think are not worth going into in the scope of this conversation. I think many of them are known. I've discussed them. You get it. It's different, and the incentives aren't just good for me. So the direction of OP was kind of like pushing me away anyway, and then switching to digital also pushed me away. So my current engagement with Magic is I play enough constructed to keep up with the formats to be able to write like strategy content for Star City Games, and I draft because I like doing it, and I am actually later today, so presumably before anyone sees this interview, launching my own podcast about Limited. That each episode will discuss how to draft a single archetype in the current Limited format. And I've drafted.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Didn't you have a podcast before this as well?
I previously had another podcast that was kind of just talking to Paulo and Siggy about Magic generically, and it was very unfocused and just like fun friends hanging out talking about stuff. Mm-hmm. This podcast is going to be very, very different structure. It's just me, and it's going to be like lecture style, pure like info dump, like here's how to draft, and like here's like the theory behind this, here's how to do it. Like, listen to this, and you'll win more Limited matches.
Was the incentive to do the podcast maybe from like some Star City manager, or is it just a project of yours? You just like wanted to talk about Magic and stuff like that?
So I miss doing a podcast, and I think that I've figured out the right way to teach people Limited, and I think it's a little bit different than the Limited content that exists, and I kind of want to prove. It's the same thing as always. I have an idea, and I want to prove that it's right. And the way to test my idea about how people should learn Limited is by trying to teach them Limited this way. And my goal is that people who listen to it learn a lot, and then they tell me that they learned a lot, and then I can prove that I was right about how to teach Limited and feel good about having helped people.
Great. My last question is I actually wanted to ask that at the beginning when we started talking about the fact that you sometimes play more cards in Limited, but then I forgot about it. Do you think that like playing more cards in Magic is like somewhat undiscovered territory? I'm talking about Constructed right now. Do you think that like it's kind of unlikely that it occurs, and also maybe the upside isn't really that there, so people really don't try for it? But do you think that maybe if like computer could play like infinite games, it would like often came to a conclusion that maybe playing like 62 cards or maybe like even more, some like weird number, would be like the best EV deck or whatever? Do you think that maybe in like 10 years these things will happen, or do you just think that that's nonsense?
Yeah, so I've actually like written about this a lot at various points. And obviously, there's like the Grand Prix that Ben Rubin won with 64 cards, and
it was like a Scapeshift deck, right?
What was that?
It was actually like a Scapeshift deck, right? He just like needed enough Mountains in his deck or something.
It was no. So there was a 66 card Scapeshift deck that was going around on Magic Online for a while, and then Ben Rubin won a PT with just like, I think it was like a Jeskai Black style. Like it involved like Jace and like fetch lands. And he just played a 64-card deck. It wasn't about mountains. It was about the same thing that has driven most of my thoughts about playing extra cards, which is a balance between fetch lands and fetchable lands. Because fetch lands are so much stronger than not fetch lands, because they are basically like 5-color lands if you have the right things to search for, that you want your deck to be like, you'd rather draw nothing but fetch lands, or you at least want a fetch land in every opening hand to make all your mana perfect. But you need to have lands that you can actually find with those fetch lands. And they're competing for like slots in a deck, where it's like, well, I need enough lands to find, and then the rest of the lands find them. And if you just have more slots, you can get more lands to find, which makes each of your fetches better, but also more fetch lands, which makes your average land draw better. So basically, in formats where fetch lands exist, and where you have a large pool with a lot of fetch lands and a lot of dual lands, the bigger your deck has to, up to a certain point that is more than 60 cards, the more powerful your mana base is. You get like more options and more fetch lands. This is much more true when cards like Mystic Sanctuary exist, where Mystic Sanctuary is awful to draw, but any additional Mystic Sanctuary is fantastic in your deck. Like your like Control Mirror, you're much stronger if you have 4 Mystic Sanctuaries than someone else who has 2 Mystic Sanctuaries. But like you certainly don't want to draw Mystic Sanctuary twice as often as them. You just want access to more of them with fetch lands. So the more similar the power of spells is, and the more advantage there is to be gained by putting more lands in your deck, the more likely it is that it's worth having a bigger deck so that you get more of these like land slots to increase the total value of all your fetch lands.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you were just playing a deck full of 2/2s, then it wouldn't really matter. So you just want to maximize your mana base. So assuming the power level is close, it makes sense. Do you think there are like some other occasions when this can occur that wouldn't involve mana base? Like maybe you just like need to fill certain cards for certain
like Birthing Con. Like anytime you have like a really robust tool like engine to find silver bullets, then like you never want to draw your silver bullets, but you want access to them. So yeah, like it absolutely comes up in like Eladmri's Call Birthing Pod type decks. It's just that currently the land toolbox is like a lot more powerful than the spell toolbox in like Modern. But yeah, basically the only reason to play extra cards at all is when you have a way to search your library specifically. And the more things you have that say search your library, the more incentive there is to have a bigger library. So that's basically what you need to look at. It's just like, does your deck ever search its library? If so, how often? And then if it's frequently enough, are your choices meaningfully limited by having a smaller deck in a way that they wouldn't be limited if your deck were larger? And then if that's all true, then can you increase your deck without decreasing meaningfully your access to some important resource, like the cards that search themselves or whatever?
Do you think like this always has to be the case? Because I remember times when like Patrick Chapin or Jerry Thompson were like playing 61 cards decks. It was like some kind of a control deck, and the main reason was that they just like all the cards they had in the deck, they just like played certain role. So for example, they can cut like one Ratogod, but then they have only two, and they're just like not enough for these matchups. So they can cut like, I don't know, one counterspell, but then like just like the balance of the deck wouldn't function without the 61 cards. Do you think that that's just like flaw and they didn't build their deck correctly, or do you think that that can actually occur?
So I know of specific control decks where Jerry specifically has played more than 60 cards, and those decks were Mystical Teachings decks.
Okay.
So I don't know if there's actually another example that you're thinking of, but I'm pretty sure that you're talking about Teachings control decks. I don't think that they were ever like, well,
I think the deck that I had in mind was in the Coldblade era. He in one of the Star City games opens, he played 61 cards, and and the one with Chapin was just some random Grixis control deck.
Chapin had a Cruel Ultimatum deck that played 61, and I think that was because he literally just wasn't sure the last two cards was better, and like I think that there are spots where it's like defensible in the moment, given the information you have, to be like, well, I think I'm going to lose more by guessing wrong about which of these two cards to play than I will by playing both of them. But that, like,
it's testing,
if there is not tutoring involved, I believe that sufficient testing would always allow you to choose a better 60 than the 61 you would present. But I think that, like, once your deck has Mystical Teachings or whatever, all that goes out the window and anything could be right.
Yeah. It was awesome to hear from you about this, because, you know, I was thinking about this stuff a lot, and anytime I talk about it to maybe, like, you know, some of my friends or teammates, they're always like, that's just nonsense or whatever. So it was nice to hear a different take on it.
Yeah, to go much bigger picture, a statement that I've been thinking about a lot that I genuinely believe is, if something is not definitionally impossible, then it's possible. And so if you're trying to figure out, would I ever want to play more than 60 cards, then figure out if there's some strict definitional reason that you wouldn't. And I just don't think that exists. I mean, the approximation that people come up with is, well, it decreases the chance of drawing your best card, and you always want your best card. But, like, if you say, well, your best card is Primeval Titan, and if you play a 61st card, you decrease your chance of drawing Primeval Titan, and I say, what if my 61st card is an Admiral's Call I wouldn't otherwise be playing? Then, like, I've just disproven your claim that I'm less likely to have Primeval Titan because I put a 61st card in my deck.
Yeah. Yeah, that statement of, like, drawing your best card is kind of flawed, I think. People just gonna use it because, you know, to just, like, get away with the question. I don't know. Anyway, I think we talked for more than enough. You know, there's still room for something if there's something you would still like to say, but, you know, I think we have like 30 minutes, so it should be fine. Is there still something that you want to say?
Yeah, my podcast is going to be called Drafting Archetypes, and if you are interested in just, you know, my thoughts on how I approach Limited from a fundamental, like, ground-up kind of position, or generally looking to improve Limited, I highly recommend checking it out.
It's not like I have a huge following, so it's probably not gonna help you that much, but I appreciate it. So thank you, Sam, for taking your time. You know, you could have easily said no, so I'm really flattered that you agreed to this. Thank you for that. And for anyone who's watching, if you like the video, please click on the like and subscribe button, and see you next time. Bye bye.